The Kid is the fourth episode of the fifth season of Frasier. This is directed by Jeff Melman, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And this is a really fantastic episode, very funny, but very emotional. There was one point where there were tears in my eyes, and then comedy landed right at the right moment to pick it back up again. And it's perfect. It's perfectly executed. It starts off down at KCL. And Frasier asks Roz how she is doing, and understandably, Roz is annoyed that at the end of the previous episode, he basically announced to the entire Halloween party in Niles' apartment that Roz was pregnant. And she establishes in this first scene that she is keeping it. And immediately Frasier told her that she'd make a great mother. And Frasier in this episode, I think he's done everything right. He is so supportive. He says all of the right things. It's just absolutely perfect. And Roz reveals that she told the father he's actually in Cairo because he's an architect, but Roz is okay with that. And then she plays a joke on Bulldog, pretending Bulldog is the father. And we then cut to Frasier's apartment, and this was probably going to be the thumbnail because I loved it. Martin is sitting in his chair with Eddie beside him, and it's just absolutely adorable. According to IMDb, Enzo is playing Eddie in this episode. And Niles then comes over and apologizes to Daphne because, if we remember, he proposed to Daphne in the previous episode because he thought she was pregnant. Daphne is completely okay with it. Martin then has an anecdote, and he does say that a little kid needs a mother and a father, and I wish, even just one remark, I wish we had one person commenting that that doesn't always have to be the case. Having two parents is brilliant, but it doesn't always have to be a mother and a father. It can be two mothers, two fathers. Obviously, this is the 90s, and opinions were maybe not what they are today as they are then, but I still feel like it would have been nice for somebody to say, not every child needs a mother and a father, because it kind of makes, or could potentially make, anybody watching it who did, for whatever reason, grow up with not a mother and a father feel a little bit less than. So I didn't love that comment. I don't mind the comment on its own. It's the fact that nobody gave a rebuttal. Roz comes over. It's very awkward because nobody knows what to say to her, but Roz says that she wants to talk about it. She's happy for people to ask questions, and of course, they get onto the subject of the father, and she explains he actually took it very well. He's not going to be that involved, though. He moved to Cairo. And Niles responds, where would he have moved to if he had taken it badly? Absolutely love it. She then explains that he was an archaeologist, and Frasier begins to connect some dots here. And he talks to Roz privately in the kitchen, or as privately as he can, with Niles coming back and forth to get information. And it turns out that Roz hasn't told the father yet. And we then cut to Cafe Nervosa. And Roz is going to tell the father. And I don't know why I loved this, but she just says, yes, he is, 3 times in a row to things that Frasier says. And the third thing he said was, he's the father, isn't he? And her response, yes, he is. And I just thought it was a brilliant way to give that information. And Martin actually comes in to meet Frasier, so they're off to the side while Roz is telling Rick. We don't really hear the conversation with Roz and Rick. All we know is that Rick leaves. He leaves Cafe Nervosa, and Frasier obviously goes straight to Roz to make sure that she's okay. And she is okay. And Frasier, again, is there for Roz. He offers to take her out for dinner that night. He's being really supportive. And as I said, in my opinion, I think he's doing everything right. We then cut to Roz's apartment where she's getting ready to go out to dinner with Frasier. And Rick arrives with some flowers, which is very sweet. And I haven't mentioned this, Rick is only 20. And he proposes to Roz. And this is obviously, I kind of laughed a bit because he said, I've been thinking about this all afternoon. And I just thought that's a sign of your age there, that you think thinking about something for an entire afternoon is enough time to think over a serious decision like proposing to somebody. And Roz did the right thing and turned down his proposal as sweetly and kindly as she possibly could. And she gave him the sonogram to take away. What I don't agree with this is that Roz kept saying she'll raise this baby on her own, which is not a bad thing. She's willing, she's wanting, and she's able. That's absolutely fine. But the fact is, Rick clearly had some interest in being this child's father, and Roz was basically pushing him away. And she's thereby denying her child the potential to have a father in her life when that father wants some involvement. I don't think they should have jumped straight from dating for a couple of weeks to getting married for the sake of the child, but it's not an all or nothing situation. And I feel like that's not doing the right thing for the child, because they're basically saying, well, we either get married or I raise this baby completely on my own. And they kind of seem to don't understand there's a middle ground. And I don't love that. I don't think that's a very helpful attitude. I do think, yes, Rick should take this opportunity in Paris because it's clearly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but that doesn't mean he's not going to have any involvement. Roz did say she'd send him some pictures and things, which is nice, but that's not the same for the child. The child is going to miss out on having her father in her life when her father wants some involvement. So I don't agree with any of that. I feel like they don't realise there's a middle ground. So that annoyed me. But other than that, I think things went the way it should have done. Rick leaves, then there's a knock at the door. Roz assumes it's Rick again and says, I said go. And I loved the way Frasier whined, but I just got here. It was almost an early Frasier. Not necessarily season 3 of Cheers Frasier, but Frasier when things were going wrong for him in his life with, mostly Frasier when Diane, well, I won't spoil it, but when the whole Diane thing happened, Frasier became very whiny for a very long time, and just the way he said, but I just got here, really sounded like that version of Frasier. And, of course, he comforts Roz, asks her how she's doing, and she gets really upset because, as she says, I let a staple go bad. Kids need milk. And I think it's just all of these emotions hitting her at once. And she points out that she has to know everything. Whereas with Frasier and Lilith, they only had to know half of the things each, to which Frasier responds, you never met Lilith, did you? And again, Roz didn't have to do it all of her own. She didn't need to know everything by herself. Rick was willing to be in the child's life. They didn't need to get married for Rick to be there for some of the things. So again, I don't think they really thought it out very well, and it is kind of irritating for the child's sake. But other than that, I keep saying this, everything else, absolutely fine. And I got a little bit emotional when Frasier was talking about when Freddie first came along and his life with Lilith and what it was like having Freddie in the apartment and running around. And this is where the comedy came into it for me, because he's talking about all of this and how the child runs around naked, living in the moment without a care for the world. And he says, isn't that wonderful? And I had tears pooling in my eyes. And Roz responds, isn't that Bulldog? Lifting things back up right when they needed to be. And I thought it was really lovely. And Frasier points out that Roz doesn't need to do it alone. And again, she didn't need to. Rick was willing to be there for some of the stuff. But Frasier, everybody else is obviously going to be there for her as well. And it's really sweet. It's a strong episode. I think it had a lot to offer. I think Frasier in particular demonstrated, after how badly he handled things in the previous episode, demonstrated some right ways to show support. And I rather enjoyed it. Very emotional at times, very funny at other times, and I definitely thought that The Kid is a really strong episode of Frasier.